Hey there everyone and welcome to some more Dragon Reviews. This is continuing with the Attack of Dragons, the third set of 3, except it's actually 4 this time. We are doing Avalanche, Nova and Darkheart, with Fracture coming in there as well, because Fracture is basically an identical copy of Darkheart, so may as well put the two together. This set of dragons is probably my favourite set. They are some amazing dragons, so let's get stuck into it with Avalanche first of all, as we look at the requirements for them. The Dragon Claws, Fish, and the Silver. That's right. Okay, so Avalanche, this is kind of the last one of the normal type dragons which have low requirements for things. It has slightly more claws, so it's 970. Before we were seeing like 800 to 850. This takes a few more claws. However, the amount of silver is the normal kind of 14 million. It's pretty cheap. Overall, silver does take a long time, but this is, it's one of the cheaper dragons. And then experience as well, the very normal 45 million. So Avalanche is fine to get up. However, looking at the other ones, next we have Nova, and this is where it starts to go up quite a bit. So Nova has 200 Dragon Claws per quality. This is pretty standard for the later on dragons. Lots of them go to 300 for the last qualities. But anyway, overall it's 1,200 claws, and it takes quite a bit more silver. A little over double, 36 million silver, because right from the first quality, just to summon it, is 4 million. So it's one of the more expensive dragons to evolve. And then it also takes triple the experience. So instead of that 45 million, we're now looking at about 135 million. So yeah, this is what we see on the later dragons. They're all very expensive to level up, both with silver and with fish. And then we finally have the Darkheart and Fracture. So Darkheart, it doesn't actually take more silver. This is a cheaper one. For some reason, it's just cheaper. So this is just a little bit more than what we saw before. Claws-wise, 200 from each quality. And then experience-wise, though, triple the experience that it takes. And then Fracture, the later copy of it, actually doesn't have the lower silver. So it's 36 million silver to get up. And then it's, again, triple the experience from the fish. So we're getting to the expensive dragons now. These ones do take a bit more to get up, but they are well worth it. So the first dragon to look at is Avalanche. This dragon is a fan favourite because it deals absolutely crazy single target damage, and also it creates this buff zone. So as you can see, it one-shot that crystal. It doesn't do any air effect, but it does brilliant single target damage. Anyway, looking at the skills, the first skill has a 20-second cooldown, and it creates an area on the ground for 20 seconds, so basically constantly. And this area boosts all water stat by 50% and move speed by 50% as well, and also slows enemies by 50%. So it buffs you, it debuffs enemies. This increases your water stat, so if I go onto my stats page, I think all my elements are the same right now, so 126, and as you can see, my water is 176, so it's getting boosted by that 50%. This isn't 1.5 times damage, because, like I showed on the stats page there, it increases it by plus 50%. However, for the dragon, it does boost the dragon's damage by 50%. So it does work for that. Now, there are two areas. It creates one on itself, one on the target. They don't stack. If you stand in both, it doesn't increase your water stat by 100%. It doesn't do the double as slow or anything like that. Anyway, the second skill is the damage dealer. The second skill has a 10-second cooldown, and it's a single target projectile that deals 12 times basic damage. Now, that alone is pretty good. That's kind of what we saw on Crystallis, minus the air effect. However, it gets tripled on any enemy stood in the ice. Now, bear in mind, this cares about the enemy stood in the ice. So, Avalanche has to be stood in the ice for it to get its damage times 1.5, and then the enemy has to be stood in the ice for this projectile to do the triple damage. It actually does 3 hits. As you'll see, there are 3 hits that come up there. So it's not tripling the number, it's tripling the number of hits, which makes it slightly more consistent with the damage, because otherwise it would be, when it crit, it would do crazy damage, and when it didn't crit, it would do, okay damage. Anyway, what it actually does is not that 12 times, which is, what we'd normally get. It actually does 54 times basic damage when it hits, because it's getting times 1.5 from Avalanche being there, and tripled from the enemy being in its zone. So this is quite crazy. and it's really good for killing bosses. In PvP, it will do ridiculous damage to a person. It does have to set it up with putting the ice on the ground before then doing the attack. But yeah, really, really good damage dragon for single target. There's no doubt about that. The second dragon is Nova. Now this is actually more of a tanking dragon, so I'm going to let it go in and fight, and I'm not going to stand in the way. It actually only uses one of the skills in melee, but let's have a look at the skills first of all. So the first skill is a 15-second cooldown. It has a heal over time effect on Nova of 10% twice per second, so that's 20% per second for 5 seconds. So it's a full heal over 5 seconds that's consistent, twice per second is very, very frequent. And at the end of that, it deals, you can see it's using the skill right now if you want to see what it does. At the end of that, it does a blast in a big over effect and knocks back enemies, doing 3 times the basic damage. Now that doesn't crit, so that damage isn't that good, but that's what it does. Then, and it only uses the skill if the enemies are next to it. Now, the thing you just saw there, which healed it up to full health, that is the final passive effect, what I've called the third skill. And so it does that once per life if it's on low health when it has a turn, and I'll get to that in a second. It will then rapidly heal up and then do a blast doing 10 times basic damage. It's actually really quite good damage from that, as well as then obviously the heal is a 25% heal per second for 5 seconds, so more than a full heal. The second skill it uses is the one you can see now, and it, I'll just read my skill, what I wrote for it. It's a 12-second cooldown. It creates an expanding Fire Nova at the target's location, which deals 7 hits of 2 times basic damage, and then draws in all the enemies and does a blast, which then does 8 times basic damage. So the damage over time effect, those 7 hits, they don't crit, but the explosion does. So there's a lot of weird kind of not critting stuff on Nova, but yeah, I mean, it does reasonable damage. Like it does okay damage with some things, and the healing is very nice too. Like I said, this can actually pretty much tank. Like dragon stats are pretty low at the moment, but as you can see, it is roughly surviving fighting these enemies, which is impressive for an attacker dragon. So yeah, damage. The things don't crit, which is pretty poor for damage, but the explosion on the second skill does. What I meant earlier when I said when it has a turn is because it gets locked into skill animations for a long time, and while it's using a skill it doesn't do basic attacks. You can see here it's just sat there healing up before it does the explosion, and the second skill as well, when it does that it won't do anything while this is going on. It's moving, but it doesn't actually do anything in terms of damage or being able to use other skills. So that third skill, the thing that's listed as a passive, that is actually quite unreliable because it needs to not be in one of its skill animations at the time that's on low health for it to do that. But anyway, we're not really seeing this dragon at its full potential because the dragon stats are low, and this dragon doesn't have high health but is able to tank. If the stats were higher, you would see that it would actually be able to properly tank things while doing more damage than a tank dragon would. That's really where the niche comes from this dragon, and it's also very noticeable that this is very, very good in PvP because it's incredibly hard to kill off because of the frequent healing. It also does knockback and stun, which all of that becomes stun in PvP, so it does good stun stuff. It's very awkward to kill. It does the pull effect as well, which I believe, I think it does do stun rather than pull. Some of the pull effects they haven't changed into stuns, but either way, the dragon does good damage. It does annoying stuns. It's really, really hard to kill. When it's doing any of its heal over time effects, you basically can't kill it in PvP. So it's really good for that. And also, if you put it onto low health but don't kill it, and that last skill triggers, then it just full heal and then massive damage, which can one-shot people, potentially. So I really love this dragon. I love the design of it. It's just, it relies on its health a bit too much. So you could see right now I've helped it a little bit to survive. These tougher enemies can kill it off. The next dragon to talk about is Darkheart. Now everything said for Darkheart is also the same for Fracture. Basically the only difference between the two, there are only 2 differences. One of them is Fracture has higher stats. It has roughly 10% more stats. That may not be true if they buff the stats of the dragons, but basically Fracture's just better because of that. It's got higher stats all round, so that's good. And the other thing is Darkheart has shorter cooldown. So if you look here, I just need to pull Darkheart away because I don't want him attacking just yet. If you look here, the cooldown of the dragon is 20% less than what you see on other dragons. So normally they have a 2-hour cooldown, and then if you have the guild skill to max, you can get them down to 1 hour. Darkheart it's unrelated to that cooldown. It's just a separate anything the cooldown is then gets reduced by 20%. The reason behind all this is Darkheart's a very unusual dragon. It came out as part of some special event thing that went on where we had to do a certain thing in the game, and it would unlock extra abilities on Darkheart for the certain goals that the community reached. So we all had to do something, and then it's like if enough of us did it, then or we did it enough times as a community, then it got extra skills. So Darkheart has 4 skills and also this reduced cooldown because we managed to hit all the stretch goals. So it's the most complicated one so far, and it's seriously good. So the first skill has a 12-second cooldown. It creates this kind of ball on... also, if you're wondering why they're hearts, it's called Darkheart because it was a Valentine's Day event. It's technically a Valentine's dragon, even though it doesn't look like that at all. So the first skill was that there. It was a ball that pulls all enemies into the particular enemy that you target with that. And it does 2 times basic damage, up to 6 times because it does that each second in a large area around that enemy. And it's large also because it's pulling the enemies into that. So this is nice for keeping the enemies away. You'll see there it also has a pushback skill. So with the pushback as well as the pulling enemies to a target, it does a really good job of controlling enemies, keeping them together and dealing damage to all of them. So the second skill is that big area of effect pushback stuff. Does a big area of effect blast, dealing 8 times basic damage, which roots enemies for 2 seconds, which stops them from moving anywhere before pushing them back, just as you saw. Unfortunately, he has drawn in quite a few enemies at once, just about surviving. So that's that second skill. That's the main kind of damage skill. And you can see it's got a crazy range, and the knockback is lovely as well for keeping enemies away. And then, you pull them together, as I said. The third skill is the healing skill. So this creates an aura around around Darkheart. It does the damage over time to all enemies for 10 seconds, dealing 0.5 times basic damage twice per second. So basically the equivalent of 1 basic attack per second for the 10 seconds. So dealing up to 10 times basic attack damage. It also heals Darkheart and any party members in that area around Darkheart for 6% 6% of your health each second. So that goes up to a 60% heal over those 10 seconds. Also, not noted on the skill description normally, it doubles the attack speed of Darkheart, so it attacks once per second. I don't know why this isn't in there. I mean, there's a lot of complicated stuff on Darkheart, so maybe that's why it's missed. But you can see it right now, it's attacking really quite quickly with basic attacks, while it's got that aura going. So, even without the fourth skill that we're about to talk about in a second, Darkheart does a really, really good job of controlling the enemies, pushing them back, pulling them towards each other away from Darkheart generally, and also healing itself and doing massive area of effect damage. Darkheart really controls enemies and survives. I've let Darkheart take some damage during this fight, and it is taking half damage because it's shadow versus shadow. Darkheart's also dealing half damage, I forgot to mention at the beginning. But yeah, Darkheart does a really good job of controlling the enemies and staying alive and dealing so much area effect damage. Darkheart's one of my favourites, if you can't tell. It does a lot of stuff and generally just really good all round. It can solo bosses really nicely because it can actually mess them up with the rooting and knockback stuff. I don't know why they put rooting and knockback on the same dragon. But anyway, the fourth skill is a minor thing that sometimes comes up. It's a 5% chance every time Darkheart gets hit that it triggers this thing which makes it invincible for 2 seconds. Just helps it survive a bit better. It's nothing major, but does help out a little bit. So we're going to look at Fracture now, because Darkheart's just killed off all the enemies. As we see Fracture fighting now, it's going to be doing double damage, as opposed to Darkheart, which was just doing half damage. So the damage should be a lot more, and it should really clear out the enemies quickly. So let's see if that's true. So the three skills are exactly the same. The animations look very similar. They're all just, you know, kind of whitish yellow, or yellowish white, whitish yellow, compared to the sort of dark and purple, black and purple. Anyway, so like I said, the skills, they push away enemies, they draw them together away from Darkheart or Fracture, and it does a really good job of surviving with the healing as well, and just really good damage output overall, hurting all the enemies and killing them off. Can't really say enough about Darkheart and Fracture to say how good they are. They're just really, really good all round, and in PvP they're also excellent because they've got these effects of the knockback, the root, all that kind of stuff. The pulling does a stun, and yeah, really, really reliable, great everywhere. They can solo things, and that's great when you have an attacker dragon. You would not expect it to survive too well. I really like this as well, supporting knights, because knights want to generally control lots of enemies, and Darkheart and Fracture just add to that a lot of control. They don't mind being close to the enemies either. So yeah, really good all-round dragon. Let's have a look at how they compare to the other damage dragons in terms of damage per second. So Avalanche, if you hadn't guessed it, or well, you probably would have seen in the previous videos, Avalanche is top of the list. It does incredible single target damage, about double the damage per second of the next dragons, and yeah, no surprise really. It is the single target damage dragon, and when you want air effect, typically they're quite a bit lower in the damage output. So Avalanche is amazing for boss killing. It's not good at all if there are lots of enemies, and it doesn't like getting surrounded by enemies at all. It dies off really easily. So it has its place, and it's really good, and I'm not surprised lots of people like it. Nova is down near the bottom. It's a bit higher than Mist, or a fair bit higher than Mist, about what is that, 40% higher. It's reasonable damage output, nothing too crazy, but perfectly fine damage output. It does nice air of effect as well. Most of its damage is air of effect, as you can see. The main thing is it tanks. I've talked about it a fair bit when we were showing it. It tanks really well, it survives very well, and it's great in PvP. It's just kind of giving up some damage output for that tanking, which is no surprise really. So Nova's very cool dragon. It's not going to be your biggest damage dealer though. And then we have Fracture and Darkheart, which are up here at the top. They are seriously good. I've gone on about it a little bit in this video. They are the best air of effect damage dragons. Zunong and Embersoul, they are there and they're good, but they're both pet. So, you know, it depends on how good pet damage is at the time. They may not really, I'm trying to think of the word, deserve. They may not really deserve second and third place in this table, but Fracture and Darkheart definitely do. Their damage output is almost entirely large air effect. They've got healing effects, it's a party heal, and they control the enemies very nicely. So great dragons, some of my favourite, well probably my favourite dragons. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. The most exciting dragons of the attackers. But we've got some cool ones to come, so I hope you come to see that video very soon. I'll see you then.